The sun beat down mercilessly on Colton Drake's face as he rode into Buffalo, Wyoming Territory, dust kicking up beneath his stallion's hooves. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild, untamed, and rife with opportunity for men like him. But Colton wasn't interested in gold or glory anymore, just a place to hang his hat and forget the ghosts that had chased him across 3 states. He hadn't planned to stop in Buffalo for more than a night, but the notice about an auction caught his eye as he passed the general store. Property auctions weren't uncommon in these parts: failed homesteads, foreclosures, and occasionally the more troubling kind. The kind that made his stomach turn. Livestock, property, and indentured contracts to be sold to the highest bidder, he read aloud, his voice gritty from trail dust. 2 o'clock at the town square. Colton checked his pocket watch. It was already past 1:30. He'd planned to continue riding north toward Montana Territory, but something about the words indentured contracts left a sour taste in his mouth. He'd seen too many of those sales in his lifetime: desperate people selling themselves into what amounted to little more than slavery, all because the law looked the other way. He tied his horse outside the saloon, ordered a whiskey, and downed it in one swift motion. The burning sensation did nothing to quell his unease. Outside, he heard the gathering crowd and the sound of a gavel being tested. The auction was about to begin. Perhaps it was mere curiosity, or perhaps it was something else entirely that drove Colton to join the crowd assembling in the town square. Men in various states of cleanliness, from well-dressed cattle barons to dust-covered miners, gathered around the wooden platform where a portly man with a handlebar mustache was arranging papers. "Gentlemen, we'll begin with farming equipment," the auctioneer announced, holding up a plow. "Who'll start the bidding at $5? Colton stood at the back, arms crossed, watching with disinterest as farm implements, livestock, and parcels of land exchanged hands. The Wyoming Territory sun climbed higher, and sweat trickled down his spine beneath his cotton shirt and leather vest. Just as he'd decided to leave, the auctioneer cleared his throat dramatically. "Now for our final item," he announced, gesturing to the side of the platform. 2 men dragged forward a young woman, her wrists bound with rope. Her dark blonde hair fell in tangled waves around a dirt-smudged face, but it was her eyes, wide, green, and filled with unmistakable terror, that caught Colton's attention. A 5-year indentured contract for Miss Nora Zimmerman. 23 years old, healthy, can cook, clean, and sew. Starting bid is $100. The woman's entire body trembled visibly even from where Colton stood. Her dress, once fine but now travel-worn and soiled, hung loosely from her frame. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, but even from a distance, he could see the tears tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "100, called a graying man to Colton's left. 120, countered a red-faced rancher. 150, shouted a man whose leering gaze made Colton's hand instinctively drift toward his holster. The bidding continued to rise, each new amount making the woman flinch as if struck. When the price reached $300, the field had narrowed to 2 men, the leering stranger and a well-known saloon owner whose establishments doubled as brothels across 3 counties. $325, said the saloon owner, smiling confidently. $350, countered the leering man. The woman's trembling had intensified. Her legs seemed barely able to support her weight, and Colton noticed for the first time the raw, red marks around her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. Something inside him snapped, a dam breaking after years of holding back floodwaters. "Stop!" Colton's voice thundered across the square, silencing the crowd. He pushed his way through the onlookers, his spurs jingling with each determined step. "This ends now. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "Sir, this is a legal auction. If you wish to bid," Colton mounted the steps of the platform in 3 long strides. "This woman needs protection, not to be sold like cattle." He turned to face the crowd, his hand resting openly on his revolver. "I'll pay $500 and then I'm taking her out of here." The woman Nora finally looked up, her green eyes meeting his blue ones with a mixture of hope and suspicion. The auctioneer sputtered, "Sir, you can't just, can't I?" Colton withdrew a leather pouch and counted out gold coins onto the auctioneer's table. $500. More than fair for a contract that isn't worth the paper it's written on. The saloon owner stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute, Drake. I was bidding on that contract." "And now you're not," Colton replied, his voice deceptively calm, "unless you'd like to discuss it further." The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. The man hesitated, eyeing Colton's weathered face and the revolver at his hip. Everyone in the territories had heard of Colton Drake, former lawman turned bounty hunter. The stories of his quick draw weren't exaggerated. "No need for trouble," the saloon owner finally said, backing away. "Plenty more where she came from." Colton turned to Nora, whose trembling had subsided slightly. "Miss Zimmerman, I just purchased your contract," he said in a lower voice. "But as far as I'm concerned, it's not worth the paper it's written on. You're free to go wherever you'd like." Her cracked lips parted in disbelief. "What's the catch?" "No catch. I just couldn't stand by and watch." He reached for her bound wrists, carefully untying the ropes. "Though I suspect a woman alone might face similar troubles down the road. If you'd like an escort to wherever you're headed, I offer my services." The auctioneer thrust a document at Colton. "Sign here. She's legally yours for 5 years otherwise." Colton took the paper, ripped it in half, then in quarters. "I believe our business is concluded." He turned to Nora again. "Coming, Miss Zimmerman." The crowd parted as Colton led Nora away from the auction platform. Some men muttered disapprovingly, others with grudging respect. The woman beside him walked stiffly, as though expecting to be struck or grabbed at any moment. "My horse is at the saloon," Colton said. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" Nora nodded cautiously. "Both, but I have nothing to repay you with." "I'm not looking for repayment," her eyes flashed. "Every man wants something, Mr. Drake." They reached his horse, a sturdy buckskin stallion who nickered softly as they approached. Colton sighed, recognizing the fear behind her suspicion. "What I want," he said carefully, "is to finish my journey to Montana Territory with a clear conscience. That means not leaving you to be sold to a brothel or worse. Beyond that, I expect nothing." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The proximity seemed to make her tense again, but there was no other way to travel. "Where were you headed before?" He let the question trail off. "Nowhere," she whispered. "Anywhere away from St. Louis." As they rode out of Buffalo, Colton felt her gradually relax against him, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. He didn't know what had driven her to such desperate circumstances, but he recognized the look of someone running from their past. He'd seen it in his own eyes too many times. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they left the town behind. Colton knew they should make camp soon, but he wanted to put more distance between them and Buffalo. Nora had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her head occasionally nodding forward before she startled herself awake again. "There's a creek about 3 miles ahead," he told her during one such awakening. "We'll stop there for the night." She nodded silently, and he wondered if she'd truly heard him, or if she was still caught in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness. The creek was where he remembered it, a gentle ribbon of water cutting through a small clearing sheltered by cottonwood trees. Colton dismounted first, then helped Nora down. Her legs buckled beneath her and he caught her by the arms. "Sorry," she murmured, her face flushing. "It's been a while since I've eaten properly. No need for apologies." He guided her to sit on a fallen log. "Rest here while I set up camp." Colton moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making and breaking camp. He unsaddled his horse, gathered firewood, and soon had a small fire crackling in a ring of stones. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, biscuits from the previous day, and a tin of coffee. "It's not much," he said, offering her a biscuit and some jerky, "but it'll keep you going until morning." Nora accepted the food with shaking hands and devoured it with such desperate speed that Colton had to caution her, slowly. "You'll make yourself sick eating that fast when you're half-starved." She nodded, forcing herself to take smaller bites. After several mouthfuls, she finally spoke. "Thank you, for the food and for what you did back there." Colton nodded, pouring coffee into a tin cup for her. "No decent man could have walked away." "Plenty did," she countered, her voice gaining a bitter edge. "Watched the whole thing and bid on me like I was a prized mare. The world's full of men who have forgotten what decency looks like." Colton stared into the fire. "I've been one of them at times." They sat in silence as darkness settled around them. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks upward toward the emerging stars. Thousands of them glittered above, more visible with each passing minute as the last light faded from the western sky. "I should clean up," Nora said eventually, gesturing toward the creek. Colton nodded. "I'll keep watch from here. Take your time." She hesitated. "You won't." "Look, you have my word." Still skeptical, Nora made her way to the creek. Colton deliberately turned his back, focusing on stoking the fire and laying out his bedroll. He heard the soft splashing of water and tried not to think about the woman bathing just yards away. When she returned, her face was clean, her hair damp and somewhat more orderly. Without the layer of dust and trail grime, Colton could see she was strikingly beautiful high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and resilience. "Your turn," she said softly. Colton gathered his few toiletries and headed for the creek. The cold water was refreshing after a long day in the saddle. As he washed, he contemplated their situation. He'd acted on impulse back in Buffalo, something he rarely did anymore. Now he had a beautiful, traumatized woman in his camp, and he was responsible for her safety, at least until they reached somewhere she could start fresh. When he returned to the campfire, he found Nora huddled in his bedroll, her eyelids heavy. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, moving to get up. "I didn't mean to take your bed." "Stay put," Colton said. "I'll keep watch for a while anyway." "You don't trust me?" A hint of defiance colored her tone. He smiled slightly. "I don't trust the world around us. Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman." "Nora," she corrected, nestling deeper into the bedroll. "If you saved me from slavery, you might as well use my first name." "Colton," he offered in return, "though I expect you gathered that from the auction." She nodded, her eyes already closing. "Colton Drake, the name sounds familiar somehow." He didn't respond, hoping she wouldn't place it before sleep claimed her. His reputation wasn't something he was proud of these days. Nora's breathing soon deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Colton sat with his back against a tree, his Winchester rifle across his knees, watching over her and the surrounding darkness. The night was peaceful, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or distant howl of a coyote. He found himself studying her face in the firelight. Even in sleep, she maintained a slight furrow between her brows, as if she couldn't fully escape her troubles even in dreams. What had driven her to the point of indentured servitude? What was she running from in St. Louis? These questions occupied Colton's mind as the night deepened. Eventually, he decided it was safe enough to get some rest himself. He spread his coat on the ground near the fire, positioned his hat over his eyes, and drifted into the light sleep of a man accustomed to danger. Morning came with dew-laden grass and birdsong. Colton woke first, immediately alert as was his habit. Nora still slept soundly, one hand curled beneath her cheek like a child. He moved quietly, rekindling the fire and preparing coffee before the aroma finally roused her. "What time is it?" she asked, sitting up and pushing hair from her face. "Just after dawn." Colton handed her a cup of coffee. "We should reach Clearwater by nightfall if we ride steady." Clearwater, small settlement about 30 miles north, has a hotel, general store, and fewer unsavory characters than Buffalo. He paused. "Unless you had somewhere specific in mind." Nora cradled the coffee cup, staring into its depths. "I don't have anywhere to go, or any money to get there if I did." Colton considered this as he packed up their camp. "I could loan you enough to get started somewhere. Or—" He hesitated, aware he might be overstepping. "I'm headed to a place called Silver Creek in Montana Territory. Friend of mine has some land there, offered me work helping him build it up. It's honest labor and the country's beautiful." Hope flashed briefly in her eyes before doubt clouded them again. "And what would I do there? Be your housekeeper, your—" "Nothing like that," Colton interrupted firmly. "The territory's growing. Towns need teachers, shopkeepers, skilled hands of all kinds. What did you do before?" He gestured vaguely. "I was a teacher," she said quietly. "In St. Louis," he nodded, unsurprised. There was an intelligence in her eyes that suggested education. "Then you'd find work easily enough. Montana's full of families wanting schooling for their children." Nora considered this, her fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. "Why are you helping me like this?" Truly, Colton secured the last of their belongings to his saddle before answering. "Maybe I'm trying to balance scales that can never really be evened." She didn't press further, seeming to understand that some questions opened doors best left closed. Instead, she handed him back the empty cup and rose to her feet. "I accept your offer, Mr. Drake Colton. As far as Silver Creek, at least. I can't promise I'll stay." "Fair enough." They mounted up as the sun cleared the eastern hills. Nora sat in front of Colton again, but today she held herself less rigidly, allowing her body to move with the horse's gait rather than fighting it. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed from the open plains around Buffalo to more varied terrain. Rolling hills gave way to scattered pine forests, and distant mountains emerged from the haze on the northwestern horizon. "Is that where we're headed?" Nora asked, pointing to the mountains. "Near enough. Silver Creek sits in a valley just this side of that range." They rode mostly in silence, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and stretch their legs. During one such stop, as they sat beneath the shade of a lone pine tree sharing jerky and hardtack, Nora finally broached the subject Colton had been expecting. "I recognize your name now," she said carefully. "You were a lawman in Kansas, weren't you? And then a bounty hunter." Colton nodded, not meeting her eyes. "That was another lifetime ago. They say you killed 17 men. 23, he corrected flatly. "All with bounties on their heads or guns in their hands." Nora studied his face. "What made you stop?" The question hung in the air between them. Colton took a long drink from his canteen, buying time, wondering how much to share with this woman he barely knew. "The 23rd man had a boy," he finally said. "Couldn't have been more than 16. Grabbed his father's gun after I shot him, tried to avenge him. I disarmed the kid, didn't hurt him, but the look in his eyes." Colton shook his head. "I realized I'd just created another man who'd likely end up on the wrong side of someone else's gun someday. Decided then I'd had enough of killing." Nora absorbed this in silence. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "So you're seeking redemption in Montana. A bitter laugh escaped him. "Redemptions for story books, Nora. I'm just looking for quiet." They resumed their journey shortly after, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and saw smoke from chimneys rising in the distance. "Clearwater," Colton announced. "We'll spend the night there, get some proper food and rest." Clearwater proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road, a cluster of buildings centered around a crossroads. Still, it boasted a small hotel above the general store, a stable, and a cafe that promised home cooking on a weather-beaten sign. Colton secured them separate but adjoining rooms at the hotel, insisting on paying despite Nora's protests. "You can repay me when you're settled and earning," he told her. "For now, let's just focus on getting you fed and rested." The cafe provided the first real meal either of them had had in days: venison stew, fresh bread, and blackberry pie for dessert. Colton watched with satisfaction as color returned to Nora's cheeks with each bite. "Tell me about Silver Creek," she requested as they lingered over coffee. "What's it like?" Colton leaned back in his chair, picturing the place he'd only visited once but had thought about often in the years since. It's nestled in a valley with pine forests on 3 sides and pastureland opening to the south. Creek runs right through the middle of town, clear as glass and full of trout. The settlement's small but growing. Maybe 30 families when I was there last. They've built a church, a general store, and a school building, though my friend Charles mentioned in his letters they haven't had a proper teacher in over a year. "And your friend's ranch, that's where you'll be working," Colton nodded. "Charles Whitman. We served together briefly as deputies in Kansas before he headed north. He's got a good spread about 2 miles outside town, 1,000 acres with natural boundaries on 3 sides. Good water, good grass. He's building something real there." For the first time since he'd met her, Nora smiled genuinely. The transformation was remarkable. Her entire face lit up, and Colton found himself momentarily speechless. "It sounds wonderful," she said softly. "Like somewhere a person could start fresh." "That's the idea," he agreed, still distracted by the lingering effect of her smile. They retired early, both exhausted from the day's journey. In the privacy of his small room, Colton removed his gun belt and boots, then stretched out on the narrow bed. Through the thin wall, he could hear Nora moving about, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet, then the soft sounds of her preparing for bed. Sleep eluded him as his mind kept circling back to the woman in the next room. He'd set out on this journey alone, intending to leave his past behind and start anew in Montana. Now he found himself responsible for someone else's fresh start too. It complicated matters, but not unpleasantly so. Colton had nearly drifted off when a sound jolted him fully awake, a muffled sob from the adjoining room. He sat up, listening intently. More sobs followed, clearly Nora trying to cry quietly. He debated with himself before finally rising and tapping gently on the connecting door. "Nora. Are you all right?" The crying stopped abruptly. "I'm fine," came her strained reply. "May I come in?" "Just to talk." A long pause followed before he heard movement, then the lock turning. The door opened a crack, revealing Nora in a borrowed nightgown from the hotel proprietor's wife. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks wet with tears. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said, embarrassed. "You didn't." Colton remained in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. "Nightmares," she nodded, wiping at her cheeks. "And memories. They're almost the same thing now." "Do you want to talk about it? Sometimes naming the demons makes them less frightening." Nora hesitated, then opened the door wider in silent invitation. Colton entered but remained standing near the door while she returned to perch on the edge of the bed. "I was engaged," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. To a banker's son in St. Louis, Edmund Blackwell. He seemed kind, charming. My father approved, thought the match would secure my future. Colton waited silently as she gathered herself to continue. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he'd been unfaithful with one of our maids. When I confronted him, he became enraged, said it meant nothing, that men had needs, and that as his wife, I'd be expected to look the other way. Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her nightgown. I broke the engagement. Good for you, Colton said quietly. Not good at all, as it turned out. Edmund's father owned the bank that held the mortgage on my father's business. Within a month, they called in the loan. My father couldn't pay. He had a heart attack the same day they came to take our home. Tears welled in her eyes again. He died 3 days later. I'm sorry, Nora. I had nothing left. No family, no home, no money. I tried to find work as a teacher, but Edmund's family made sure no school in St. Louis would hire me. I finally managed to secure passage west by agreeing to work off the fare, but the man who arranged it sold my contract as soon as we reached Wyoming Territory. She looked up at Colton, her expression haunted. If you hadn't been there. But I was, he said firmly. And now you're free to build whatever life you choose. Nora wiped away her tears. Why did you really stop at the auction? You could have kept riding like everyone else. Colton leaned against the doorframe, considering his answer. I've seen too many people treat it as property. Done nothing about it too many times. Maybe I was finally in the right place at the right time to do something that mattered. She studied him thoughtfully. You're not what I expected from the stories. Few of us are. He straightened up. Try to get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow. Colton, she called as he turned to leave. Thank you for listening. He nodded once, then returned to his room, closing the door softly behind him. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized Nora Zimmerman had awakened something he thought long dead, a desire to protect someone beyond himself, to ensure another's happiness. It was uncomfortable and comforting all at once. Morning dawned clear and crisp. They breakfasted quickly at the cafe, then visited the general store where Colton purchased supplies for the remainder of their journey, including a dress, shawl, and sturdy boots for Nora, despite her protests. Consider it an advance on your future earnings, he told her when she objected to his spending. They left Clearwater by mid-morning, continuing northward on a trail that grew progressively less traveled. The terrain became more challenging as they approached the Montana Territory border, with steeper hills and denser forests. By late afternoon, they were following a narrow trail through pine woods when Colton noticed storm clouds gathering to the west. We should find shelter before that hits, he said, nodding toward the darkening sky. There's a line shack about 3 miles ahead if I remember right. They pushed on, racing against the approaching storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance as they finally spotted the shack, a crude, single-room structure built for cowboys working the range far from the main ranch house. It was weathered but intact, with a small corral attached. They'd barely gotten inside and the horse settled when the skies opened. Rain hammered down on the wooden roof, and wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. The interior was Spartan, a small cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a single narrow cot. Not exactly the hotel in Clearwater, Colton remarked as he built a fire in the stove, but it'll keep us dry. Nora huddled near the growing warmth, rubbing her arms. It's perfect. I never thought I'd be so grateful for 4 walls and a roof. They prepared a simple meal from their supplies: beans, salt pork, and the last of the bread from Clearwater. The storm continued unabated, and as darkness fell, it became clear they'd be spending the night. Take the cot, Colton said, unrolling his bedding on the floor. I've slept in worse places. Nora looked at the narrow bed, then at Colton. "This is ridiculous. We're both adults. The cot is wide enough for two if we're careful." Colton raised an eyebrow. "I don't think that's wise." "I trust you," she said simply. "And it's foolish for either of us to sleep on this cold floor when we don't have to." After some argument, Colton reluctantly agreed. They arranged themselves awkwardly on the narrow cot, back to back, with as much space between them as the confined quarters would allow, which wasn't much. "Good night, Nora," Colton said stiffly. "Good night." Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded Colton. He was acutely aware of Nora's warmth against his back, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the subtle floral scent of her hair. It had been years since he'd been this close to a woman in circumstances that weren't paid for, and he found the innocence of it more unsettling than any saloon encounter. He must have eventually dozed off because he awoke suddenly to find Nora turned toward him, her face pressed against his shoulder, one arm draped across his chest. She was still asleep, her expression peaceful for once. Carefully, trying not to wake her, he disentangled himself and rose from the cot. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Dawn was breaking, pink and gold streaks illuminating a sky scattered with retreating clouds. Colton stood in the doorway, breathing in the fresh, pine-scented air. "Is it morning already?" Nora's sleep-husky voice came from behind him. He turned to find her sitting up, her hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. Something tightened in his chest at the sight. "Just barely," he replied. "Storms moved on. We can make good time today if we start early." She nodded, stifling a yawn. "I'll help with breakfast." They worked together in comfortable silence, preparing coffee and a simple meal of hardtack softened in the pan with bacon grease. As they ate, Nora studied Colton with newfound interest. "You're not what I expected," she said, echoing her words from the previous night. "So you mentioned." "No, I mean," she hesitated. "You're gentler than your reputation suggests, more thoughtful." Colton shrugged uncomfortably. "Reputations are built on the loudest moments of a man's life, not the quiet ones." They packed up and continued their journey as the sun climbed higher. The trail led them through stands of ponderosa pine, across clear mountain streams, and through meadows bursting with wildflowers. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and a vast valley opened before them. "Silver Creek," Colton announced, pointing to the distant cluster of buildings nestled along a winding waterway. "And there," he indicated a larger structure set apart from the town with outbuildings and corrals. "That's Charles's ranch." They descended into the valley as the afternoon lengthened. Colton felt a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension as they approached the settlement. This place represented his future, a quieter life, honest work, perhaps even peace. And now, unexpectedly, Nora was part of that vision. They rode directly to the ranch rather than stopping in town. As they approached the main house, a substantial two-story structure built of squared logs, a man emerged onto the porch. Tall and broad-shouldered with prematurely graying hair, he shaded his eyes against the late afternoon sun, then broke into a wide grin. "Colton Drake, as I live and breathe," he called, striding toward them. "Beginning to think you changed your mind." Colton dismounted and clasped the man's extended hand. "Charles, good to see you, old friend." Charles Whitman's eyes moved to Nora, still seated on the horse. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Nora Zimmerman," Colton replied, helping her down. "We encountered each other in Buffalo. Circumstances suggested she might benefit from a fresh start in Silver Creek as well." Charles's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment beyond. "Any friend of Colton's is welcome at Whitman Ranch." He turned toward the house. "Eliza, we've got company." A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Small and compact with dark hair threaded with silver, she had laugh lines around her eyes and a warm smile. "Colton Drake," she exclaimed. "Finally decided to join the land of the living, have you?" Her gaze shifted to Nora, curiosity evident. "And who's this?" Introductions were made again, and Eliza Whitman immediately took Nora under her wing, ushering her inside with promises of a hot bath and fresh clothes while the men saw to Colton's horse. "So," Charles said as they led the tired animal to the stable, "want to tell me the real story?" Colton recounted the auction in Buffalo, Nora's circumstances, and their journey north. Charles listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. "Always did have a weakness for damsels in distress," he remarked when Colton finished. "It's not like that." Charles shot him a skeptical look. "Isn't it? I saw how you looked at her, Colt. She needs a friend, not a suitor, especially not one with my history." Colton busied himself with unsaddling his horse. "Maybe so," Charles conceded, "but history's behind you now. That's the whole point of coming here, isn't it? Fresh start for everyone." Inside the house, they found the women in the kitchen. Nora, freshly bathed and dressed in one of Eliza's dresses, slightly too short but otherwise fitting well enough, was helping prepare dinner. Her damp hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her face, scrubbed clean, glowed in the warm lamplight. She looked up when Colton entered, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had arrived, safely, at the beginning of whatever came next. Dinner was a lively affair. Charles and Eliza had 3 children, 10-year-old twins, a boy and girl named James and Jane, and a 7-year-old son, Peter. They peppered Colton with questions about his travels and Nora about life back east. Through it all, Colton found his gaze returning to Nora, watching as she gradually relaxed in the warm family atmosphere. "Now," Eliza said as they finished dessert, "Nora will stay with us until she's settled. The schoolhouse has a small attached living quarters for the teacher, assuming you're interested in the position." Nora looked startled. Yes, I would be, but I haven't even been introduced to the town council or—" Charles laughed. "Eliza is the town council, more or less. At least when it comes to the school. We've been without a proper teacher for nearly a year," Eliza explained. "Been taking turns, parents teaching a week at a time. The children are falling behind. If you're qualified and willing, the position is yours." "I am qualified," Nora said, a hint of pride entering her voice. "I taught for 3 years in St. Louis. Then it's settled. School term starts in 2 weeks. That gives you time to prepare and get settled." "And Colton," Nora asked, glancing his way, "where will he stay?" "The ranch foreman's cabin," Charles answered. "It's small but comfortable. Previous foreman moved to Oregon last spring, been waiting for the right man to fill the position." He looked meaningfully at Colton. "If you're still interested." "I am," Colton confirmed. "Though I'm not sure I've got the experience for foreman. You've got good judgment and you can handle men. The rest you'll learn." Charles rose from the table. "Come on, I'll show you the cabin now. It's just beyond the main corral." The foreman's cabin proved to be a solid 1-room structure with a small covered porch. Inside was a cast iron stove for cooking and heat, a sturdy bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a chest of drawers. Simple, but far more comfortable than most places Colton had lived in recent years. "It's perfect," he told Charles. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow's soon enough. Get a good night's rest first." They returned to the main house where Eliza was showing Nora to the guest room. As the women disappeared upstairs, Charles pulled a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet and poured 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Colton echoed the toast, then added, "and old friendships." They talked late into the night, catching up on the years since they'd last seen each other. Charles had done well for himself, starting with a small parcel of land and gradually expanding until the Whitman Ranch was one of the largest operations in the county. "It's not all been smooth sailing," he admitted. "Had some trouble with rustlers last year. Lost nearly 30 head before we caught them, and the winters up here can be brutal. But it's a good life, Colt. Honest work, good neighbors, beautiful country." Sounds like exactly what I've been looking for. As Colton walked back to his cabin later, he paused to look up at the stars. They seemed impossibly bright here, away from the smoke and haze of larger settlements. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of his new life: ranch foreman, respectable citizen, maybe even neighbor. The thought of seeing Nora regularly in town brought both anticipation and unease. She deserved better than a reformed gunslinger with blood on his hands. And yet, he couldn't deny the connection he felt to her after their brief time together. Perhaps, in time, friendship might be possible between them. Anything more seemed like asking too much of the fresh start they'd both been granted. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Colton threw himself into learning his new responsibilities, familiarizing himself with the ranch's operations, getting to know the hands, and spending long days in the saddle surveying the extensive property. Charles was a patient teacher, and Colton found he had an aptitude for the work that surprised them both. He saw Nora only occasionally during this time, usually at Sunday dinner at the main house. Each time, she seemed more settled, more confident. Eliza had taken her to town and introduced her around, and the community had welcomed her enthusiastically. The prospect of a proper teacher for their children had generated excitement throughout Silver Creek. "The school board met yesterday," Nora told him during one such dinner, her eyes bright with excitement. "They've approved funds for new books and supplies, and several families have already promised to help ready the schoolhouse." "That's wonderful," Colton said, genuinely pleased for her. "When do you move into the teachers' quarters?" "Next week. The Millers, they own the general store, are donating some furniture, and Mrs. Jenkins from the dress shop is making curtains." She laughed, a sound Colton realized he'd been missing. "Everyone's been so kind, it's almost overwhelming after." She didn't need to finish. After St. Louis, after the auction, after everything she'd endured. "You deserve it," he said simply. The day before school was to begin, Colton rode into town with a specific purpose in mind. He'd been saving his first month's wages for this. The general store in Silver Creek was modest compared to those in larger towns, but Mr. Miller prided himself on being able to order special items for his customers. "Mr. Drake," the shopkeeper greeted him. "What can I help you with today?" "I need a gift," Colton said, feeling suddenly awkward. "For Miss Zimmerman, for her first day of teaching." Miller smiled knowingly. "I might have just the thing." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a brass bell with a wooden handle. "Every teacher needs a proper bell," Miller explained. "Had this one ordered months ago for the last teacher, but she left before it arrived." The bell was beautiful, simple but elegant, with a clear, bright tone when Miller demonstrated it. Colton purchased it immediately, along with a small card on which he carefully wrote, "For new beginnings, wishing you every success, CD." He left the package with Mrs. Miller to be delivered to the schoolhouse the following morning, feeling both satisfied and slightly foolish. It was a small gesture, but he hoped it might convey what he struggled to express in person: his admiration for her resilience and his genuine wish for her happiness in Silver Creek. The first day of school came and went. Colton deliberately kept his distance, not wanting to distract Nora from her important day. But that evening, as he returned to his cabin after a long day moving cattle to fresh pasture, he found her waiting on his porch. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loosely pinned up, and she was smiling that transformative smile that seemed to light her from within. "I got your gift," she said as he dismounted. "It's perfect, thank you." Colton felt heat rise to his face. "Seemed appropriate. How was your first day?" "Wonderful, challenging, exhausting," she laughed. 27 students ages 6 to 15 with wildly different levels of education. I'll be grouping them by ability rather than age, I think. He nodded, unsure what to say next. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Nora spoke again. "I wanted to invite you to dinner at my quarters to thank you properly." She rushed on before he could respond. "It's very simple, just chicken and dumplings, and probably not as good as Eliza's, but I'd like to." "That is, if you're not too tired." "I'd be honored," Colton said, rescuing her from her rambling. "Just let me wash up first." 20 minutes later, freshly shaved and wearing his cleanest shirt, Colton knocked on the door of the small dwelling attached to the schoolhouse. Nora answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting just inside. The teachers' quarters consisted of 2 small rooms, a combination kitchen and sitting area, and a bedroom visible through a partially open door. Nora had made it surprisingly homey in a short time. The promised curtains hung at the windows, a colorful rag rug covered part of the plank floor, and a small bookshelf held a modest collection of volumes. Dinner was indeed simple, but delicious. They ate at a small table near the window, talking easily about their respective days. Colton found himself sharing stories about the ranch hands, describing the beautiful views from the north pasture and explaining his plans for improving the western fence line. "You sound like you've found your place," Nora observed as they finished eating. "I think I have," he agreed. "And you? Is Silver Creek what you hoped for?" She considered this, her head tilted slightly. "It's more than I hoped for. A month ago I had no future at all. Now I have work I love, a home of my own, and—" She hesitated. "And," Colton prompted. "Friends," she finished, her eyes meeting his. "Real friends." The word felt simultaneously right and insufficient. Colton nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After dinner, they sat beside the small fireplace, drinking coffee. The evening had brought a chill, and the fire cast a warm glow across the room. It felt strangely domestic, deeply comfortable in a way Colton had never experienced. "Tell me about your life before," Nora said suddenly. "Before the bounty hunting. You mentioned Kansas." Colton rarely spoke of his past, but something about the quiet intimacy of the moment made it easier. He told her about growing up in Missouri, his father a blacksmith, his mother dead from fever when he was 12. How he drifted west after his father remarried, working odd jobs until he landed in Dodge City during its wildest days. "Marshal Earp hired me as a deputy," he explained. "Thought I had a steady hand and a level head. I was 22 and flattered. Didn't realize what I was signing up for." "That's where you met Charles," few months later. "He was hired around the same time. We worked together for about a year before he decided the job would kill him young." He was right. Nora studied him in the firelight. "What changed for you? Why did you stay?" Colton stared into the flames, remembering. "Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. And I was good at it, keeping order, tracking men who'd broken the law. When I finally left Dodge, it seemed natural to turn to bounty hunting. Good money, and I already had the skills and reputation. But you grew to hate it." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Not at first. I told myself I was bringing criminals to justice, but after a while. It changes a man, hunting other men. Makes you hard in ways you don't notice until it's too late." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her touch was warm, gentle, and entirely unexpected. "But not too late for you." Colton looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her face. Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. "Nora," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. A knock at the door interrupted them. Nora withdrew her hand and rose to answer it. A young boy stood on the doorstep, breathless from running. "Miss Zimmerman," he gasped. "Ma sent me. Billy Turner's taken bad sick. Fever and coughing, something awful. Ma says, can you come?" You being a teacher and all, she thought you might know what to do. Nora turned to Colton. "The Turners live on the edge of town. They're boys in my class, bright child, about 8. "I'll walk with you," Colton said immediately. The Turner cabin was small and poorly constructed, drafty even in the mild fall weather. Inside, they found Mrs. Turner, a thin, worn-looking woman bent over a pallet where a small boy lay shivering despite being wrapped in several blankets. His face was flushed with fever and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Nora went to him immediately, placing a gentle hand on his forehead. "How long has he been like this?" "Started this morning with just a cough," Mrs. Turner said anxiously. "Got worse all day. By supper time he was burning up and having trouble breathing." Nora looked at Colton. "It could be pneumonia. He needs a doctor." "Nearest doctor's in Billingston," Mrs. Turner said despairingly. 20 miles at least, and my husband's away with the wagon until tomorrow." Colton made a quick decision. "I'll ride for the doctor. My horse is fresh enough." "In the dark?" Nora asked worriedly. "Moon's nearly full. I know the way." He turned to Mrs. Turner. "Keep him warm. Try to get him to drink if he's able. I'll be back with the doctor as soon as possible." Outside, he mounted his horse and set off at a gallop. The night was clear, the moon providing enough light to follow the road safely. He pushed his mount harder than he would have under normal circumstances, driven by the image of the sick child and the worry in Nora's eyes. Billingston was a larger settlement than Silver Creek, with several saloons still brightly lit despite the late hour. Colton located the doctor's house on the main street, marked by a painted sign. It took several minutes of pounding on the door before a disheveled, elderly man appeared. "What in tarnation, doctor, I'm from Silver Creek," Colton interrupted. "Child there with what might be pneumonia. High fever, labored breathing. Can you come?" The doctor, Dr. Harrison, according to the sign, rubbed his face wearily. "Silver Creek's a fair ride. Boy might not make it till morning." "That's why I'm here now," Colton said firmly. "I've got a fresh horse for you at the livery. We can be there in 2 hours if we push." Something in Colton's tone must have convinced the doctor. He nodded once. "Give me 5 minutes to gather my things." The return journey seemed even longer than the ride out. The doctor, despite his age, proved a capable rider, keeping pace with Colton through the moonlit landscape. They reached Silver Creek just as false dawn was lightening the eastern sky. At the Turner cabin, they found Nora still awake, bathing the boy's face with cool water while his mother dozed in a chair nearby. The child's condition had worsened, his breathing now a frightening wheeze, his small chest heaving with the effort. Dr. Harrison took over immediately, examining the boy with practiced efficiency. "Pneumonia, sure enough," he confirmed grimly. "And a severe case. We'll need to make a mustard plaster for his chest, get some herbal steam going to ease his breathing." For the next several hours, they worked together, the doctor directing. Nora and Mrs. Turner preparing poultices and broths, Colton keeping the fire stoked and fetching water from the well. By mid-morning, the boy's fever had broken, and his breathing, while still labored, was no longer the desperate gasping of the night before. "He's young and strong," Dr. Harrison said as he packed up his medicines. "Good chance he'll pull through now. Keep up with the treatments I showed you, and I'll check back in a few days." Outside, as Colton prepared to escort the doctor back to Billingston, Nora pulled him aside. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright. "Thank you," she said simply. "You may have saved his life." Colton shrugged uncomfortably. "I just fetched the doctor." In the middle of the night at a gallop across 20 miles of rough country. She smiled softly. "Don't diminish what you did, Colton." Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, then turned and went back inside, leaving him standing there, one hand raised to the spot her lips had touched. The ride back to Billingston was uneventful. Dr. Harrison, more talkative by daylight, kept up a steady stream of stories about his 30 years of practice on the frontier. Colton listened with half an ear, his mind still back in Silver Creek with Nora. By the time he returned to the ranch that evening, he was exhausted from more than 24 hours without sleep. Charles took one look at him and ordered him straight to his cabin to rest. "Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow," his friend insisted. "You look like you're about to fall out of the saddle." Colton didn't argue. He barely remembered removing his boots before collapsing onto his bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted until the following morning. When he awoke, the sun was already high. He sat up, disoriented, before remembering the events of the previous day and night. Quickly washing and dressing, he headed to the main house where he found Eliza in the kitchen. "Well, look who's rejoined the living," she teased. "Charles said to let you sleep. Sit down, I'll get you some breakfast." As she set a plate of eggs and bacon before him, she added casually, "Nora stopped by earlier. Wanted to make sure you were all right after your midnight adventure." Colton felt a ridiculous surge of pleasure at this news. The Turner boy, any word. "Improving," she said. "Fevers stayed down." That was good thinking, fetching Dr. Harrison. After breakfast, Colton rode into town, telling himself he needed supplies but knowing his real destination was the schoolhouse. He found Nora there despite it being Saturday, arranging books on shelves and writing out lessons on the blackboard. She looked up when he entered, a smile spreading across her face. "I was hoping you'd come by. Wanted to check on Billy Turner. I visited this morning. He's much better. Still weak, but the worst has passed." She set down her chalk and dusted her hands. "You never came back yesterday. I was worried. Charles sent me straight to bed when I got in, said I looked half dead." Nora stepped closer, studying his face. "You still look tired. Worth it." He glanced around the schoolroom, noting the neat rows of desks, the carefully lettered alphabet above the blackboard, the small shelf of books. "This is coming along nicely." "It is. The children are eager to learn, even the older boys, which I hadn't expected." Her expression grew serious. "Colton, about the other night before we were interrupted." He tensed, uncertain what she might say. "I wanted to thank you properly, for everything you've done for me." She took another step closer. "From Buffalo to here, you've changed my life completely. Given me a future when I thought I had none." "You'd have found your way," Colton said. "You're stronger than you know, perhaps, but I'm glad it happened the way it did." Her eyes held his steadily. "I'm glad it was you at that auction." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Colton was acutely aware of her proximity, the soft curve of her lips, the way sunlight from the windows caught in her hair. "Nora," he began, his voice rougher than he intended, I don't have much to offer a woman like you." "A woman like me," she echoed, one eyebrow raised. "Educated, refined. You could have your pick of men in Silver Creek, proper men with clean pasts. And if I don't want a proper man," she stepped even closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent of her hair. "If I want a man who would ride 20 miles in the dark for a child he barely knows, who would tear up an indentured contract and expect nothing in return." Colton remained motionless, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had fallen over them. I've done things I'm not proud of. Haven't we all? Her hand came up to rest lightly on his chest, just over his heart. The past is behind us, Colton. Isn't that what Silver Creek is supposed to be about? New beginnings. He couldn't argue with his own words thrown back at him. Instead, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them exploring unfamiliar territory. Then Nora's arms slid around his neck and something shifted. The kiss deepened, became hungry, urgent. Colton's hands found her waist, drawing her closer until their bodies pressed together from chest to knees. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Nora's cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly swollen, her eyes wide with surprise, whether at his boldness or her own response. Colton couldn't tell. "I've wanted to do that since Clearwater," he admitted hoarsely. "Why didn't you? Didn't think you'd welcome it. Wasn't sure I deserved to try." She shook her head, smiling. "For a perceptive man, you can be remarkably blind." Her hands still rested on his shoulders, her body close to his. "I've been half in love with you since you tore up that contract." The declaration hung in the air between them, both exhilarating and terrifying. Colton had faced down armed men with less trepidation than he felt in this moment. "Nora." The schoolroom door swung open, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. A woman Colton recognized as Mrs. Peterson, one of the school board members, stood in the doorway, her eyes widening at the scene before her. "Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she stammered. "I just came to drop off some additional slates for Monday." "Not at all, Mrs. Peterson," Nora said smoothly, though her flushed cheeks told another story. "Mr. Drake was just helping me reach a book from the top shelf." The woman's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled, but she played along. "How thoughtful of him. I'll just leave these here, shall I?" She deposited a stack of small slate boards on a desk near the door. "Good day to you both." After she left, Colton and Nora looked at each other for a moment before both burst into laughter. "Well," Nora said when their mirth subsided, "I expect I'll be the subject of town gossip by supper time." "I'm sorry if I've compromised your position," Colton said, suddenly concerned. "Teachers are held to high standards," and she silenced him with another quick kiss. "Silver Creek isn't St. Louis. Besides, Mrs. Peterson has been trying to match me with eligible bachelors since I arrived. She'll be delighted to think she can cross me off her list." The casual implication of a future together wasn't lost on Colton. "Is that what you want, to be crossed off her list?" Nora's expression softened. "I want to see where this leads, Colton. Without rushing, but without pretending I don't feel what I feel." It was more than he dared hope for. "I'd like that too." The weeks that followed took on a new rhythm. Colton continued his work at the ranch, learning the cattle business quickly under Charles's tutelage. Nora flourished as the teacher in Silver Creek, earning the respect of parents and the adoration of her students. And between them, something beautiful grew. They took things slowly, mindful of Nora's position in the community. Their courting was proper by frontier standard Sunday dinners at the Whitman Ranch, occasional suppers at Nora's quarters with the door left conspicuously ajar, walks through town where they might touch hands but nothing more. In private moments, those stolen kisses in the schoolroom after hours, quiet conversations by firelight, their connection deepened. Colton found himself sharing things he'd never told another soul. The nightmares that sometimes woke him, the faces of men he'd killed that still haunted him, the loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years. Nora, in turn, spoke of her own fears that her father had died disappointed in her, that she might never fully escape the shadow of what had happened in St. Louis, that she might somehow fail the children who depended on her. "I understand now why you did what you did at the auction," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "You saw someone who needed saving, and you acted without thinking of the cost. It's who you are, Colton. Not the man who hunted bounties, but the man who couldn't stand by and watch suffering." "You give me too much credit," he replied, but her words eased something in him that had been knotted tight for years. As winter settled over Silver Creek, bringing snow that blanketed the valley in pristine white, their relationship became an accepted fact among the townspeople. If anyone disapproved of the schoolteacher courting the ranch foreman with the shadowy past, they kept their opinions to themselves, at least within earshot of either party. Christmas approached, bringing with it the excitement of the children and a flurry of preparations for the town's annual celebration. The schoolhouse would host a pageant followed by a community dinner and dance at the newly completed town hall. Colton, who had avoided such gatherings for years, found himself looking forward to this one. He even rode to Billingston to purchase a gift for Nora, a silver locket he'd spotted in the jeweler's window. It cost nearly a month's wages, but the thought of her face when she opened it made the expense worthwhile. The night of the celebration arrived, cold and clear with stars crystalline in the black sky. Colton dressed with unusual care, his best shirt, freshly pressed, a new vest Charles's sister had sent from back east, his boots polished to a high shine. The small box containing the locket was safely tucked in his pocket as he drove the wagon into town. The schoolhouse was transformed. Paper chains and pine boughs decorated the walls, and candles in tin holders cast a warm glow over everything. Children in their Sunday best fidgeted excitedly as parents and neighbors filed in to take seats on the benches. Nora stood at the front, radiant in a dark green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few soft curls framing her face. When she spotted Colton, her smile was like sunrise. The pageant was charming despite forgotten lines and occasional stage fright among the younger performers. Billy Turner, fully recovered from his illness, played the role of a wise man with such solemnity that it brought a lump to Colton's throat. Afterward, the gathering moved to the town hall for the feast. Tables groaned under the weight of roast turkey, ham, various pies, cakes, and side dishes contributed by every family in the community. Colton found himself seated beside Nora at the head table, an honor that would have made the old Colton distinctly uncomfortable, but which he now accepted with quiet pride. After dinner came dancing. A small band, 2 fiddlers, a banjo player, and a man with a harmonica struck up lively tunes. Couples took to the floor, from gray-haired elders to teenagers stealing shy glances at one another. "May I have this dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Colton asked formally, extending his hand. Nora placed her fingers in his, her eyes twinkling. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Drake." Colton wasn't much of a dancer, but he could manage a simple waltz. He led Nora onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. They moved together with surprising grace, as if they'd been dancing together for years rather than for the first time. "You're full of surprises," Nora murmured as he guided her through a turn. "I didn't expect you to dance so well. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings." The memory brought a smile to his face. "Haven't had much occasion to use the skill until now. I'm glad you remembered." She moved a fraction closer, her skirts brushing against his legs. "Everyone's watching us, you know. Let them." For once, Colton didn't mind being the center of attention. Let the whole town see that Nora Zimmerman had chosen him, despite his past, despite better options. It felt like a kind of redemption, Later, as the evening wound down and families began to depart, Colton led Nora outside. The night was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the air, but the sky overhead was magnificent, stars scattered like diamond dust across black velvet. "I have something for you," Colton said, withdrawing the small box from his pocket. "Merry Christmas, Nora." She opened it carefully, gasping when she saw the silver locket nestled inside. "Colton, it's beautiful." She lifted it from the box, the chain dangling between her fingers. "Will you help me put it on?" He took the locket and moved behind her. Nora lifted her hair, exposing the nape of her neck, a simple gesture that felt strangely intimate. Colton fastened the clasp, his fingers lingering briefly on her skin. When she turned to face him again, the locket gleamed against the dark fabric of her dress. "I love it," she said softly. "And I have something for you as well." From a hidden pocket in her skirt, she produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Colton unwrapped it carefully to reveal a pocket watch, not new, but well crafted and obviously cared for. "It was my father's," Nora explained. "The one thing of value I managed to keep. I want you to have it." Colton was speechless. The gift represented not just a valuable object, but a piece of Nora's past, one of the few connections she had to the life before. That she would entrust it to him meant more than words could express. "I can't take this," he finally managed. "It's too precious." "That's precisely why I want you to have it." She closed his fingers around the watch. "Because you're precious to me, Colton." The simple declaration undid him completely. Without regard for who might be watching from the town hall windows, he gathered her in his arms and kissed her a kiss that conveyed everything he couldn't find words for. When they broke apart, Nora's eyes were shining. "Take me home," she whispered. They drove back to her quarters in comfortable silence, the night wrapped around them like a blanket. At her door, Colton hesitated, knowing he should bid her good night and return to the ranch. "Stay," Nora said, reading his thoughts. "Just to talk. I'm not ready for this night to end." Inside, she built up the fire while Colton removed his coat. They sat side by side on the small sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long while they simply watched the flames, content in each other's company. "I never expected this," Nora said eventually. "When I left St. Louis, I thought my life was over. Now, Colton prompted when she trailed off. She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Now I can't imagine a life without you in it. Is that too forward to say? Not to me." He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "I've been thinking about the future, Nora. Our future." Her breath caught. "Have you? Charles has offered me a partnership in the ranch. A small share to start, building over time. Says I've proven myself these past months." He paused, gathering courage. "If I accept, I'd be building something permanent here, something that could support a family." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to speak it aloud, but both understanding its weight. "I think," Nora said carefully, "that would be a wonderful opportunity for both of us." Colton brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I don't want to rush you. After everything you've been through, you're not rushing me," she interrupted. "You're offering me exactly what I want, a future, with you." The simplicity of her acceptance humbled him. This woman, who had every reason to distrust men after her experiences, was willing to entrust her heart, her future, to him. "I love you, Nora Zimmerman," he said, the words emerging naturally, without the difficulty he'd anticipated. "I think I have since Buffalo, though I was too stubborn to admit it then. And I love you, Colton Drake." Her free hand came up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "My unlikely hero." The kiss that followed sealed promises neither needed to voice aloud. When Colton finally left, riding back to the ranch beneath a sky beginning to lighten with approaching dawn, He carried with him a certainty he'd never experienced before, the certainty of belonging, of having found his place not just in Silver Creek, but in Nora's heart. Spring came to the valley in a rush of melting snow and new growth. The mountains shed their white mantles to reveal fresh green, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows in explosions of color. With the improved weather came increased activity at the ranch as calving season arrived, keeping Colton busy from dawn to dusk and often into the night. Despite his exhaustion, he made time to ride into town at least twice a week to see Nora. Their courtship had become official after Christmas, with Colton formally asking permission of the school board to court their teacher, a formality that amused Nora, but which Colton insisted on observing. "You don't need their permission," she told him. "You already have mine." "It's not about permission," he'd explained. "It's about respect. For you, for your position, for the community." The school board had given their blessing readily enough. In truth, Nora had become such a beloved figure in Silver Creek that they would have agreed to almost anything to keep her happy and teaching their children. On a particularly fine April evening, with the sun setting gold and pink over the western mountains, Colton rode into town with a specific purpose. He'd spoken with Charles the previous day, finalizing details of their partnership agreement. He'd also visited Mr. Miller at the general store with a special order, a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but of good quality. He found Nora in the schoolhouse garden, which had been her pet project since the snow melted. She was kneeling in the dirt, planting what looked like flower seeds, her sleeves rolled up and a smudge of soil on her cheek. To Colton, she had never looked more beautiful. "Planting hope again?" he asked, using their private joke for her various projects around the school. She looked up, her face brightening. "Marigolds and zinnias. The children helped prepare the soil yesterday." Rising, she dusted her hands on her apron. "I didn't expect you today. Isn't it calving season?" "It is, but I have news that couldn't wait." He took her hands, dirt and all. "Charles and I signed the partnership papers this morning. 10% to start with options to increase over time." "Colton, that's wonderful." She squeezed his hands. "I'm so proud of you. There's more." He took a deep breath. "The agreement includes provisions for building a new house on the eastern edge of the property. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms with a view of both the mountains and the creek." Nora's eyes widened as she began to understand the implications. "That sounds like quite a house for a bachelor." "That's just it." Colton reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet box. "I'm hoping not to be a bachelor much longer." He lowered himself to one knee right there in the garden, unconcerned about the dirt staining his trousers or who might see them from the street. Opening the box, he revealed the ring he'd selected with such care. "Nora Zimmerman, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and purpose back into my life. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes. Oh, Colton, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. Their laughter mingled as he spun her around, both dizzy with happiness. "When?" she asked when he finally set her down. "When shall we be married?" "As soon as possible," he replied. "Unless you want a long engagement." Nora shook her head decisively. "We've wasted enough time already. June. After the school term ends." "June it is," Colton agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. News of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By the following morning, it seemed everyone in town knew and had an opinion on the upcoming nuptials. Most were supportive, though Colton noticed a few disappointed looks from young men who had harbored hopes for the pretty schoolteacher. The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Construction began on the new house, with Colton spending every free moment working alongside the hired carpenters. Nora divided her time between teaching and planning their wedding, which had evolved from a simple ceremony into something of a town event. "Everyone wants to be involved," she explained to Colton when he expressed surprise at the growing guest list. "Mrs. Peterson is making the cake. The Jenkins sisters are sewing my dress. Even the children are participating. The girls are making paper flowers for decorations, and the boys are building an arch for us to stand under. As long as you're happy," he said, kissing her forehead, "that's all that matters to me." Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect June 15, 1879. The ceremony would take place in the town square, followed by a celebration that promised to last well into the night. Colton prepared in Charles's study, feeling uncharacteristically nervous as he struggled with his tie. "For a man who's faced down armed outlaws, you're remarkably jumpy about saying a few words in front of friends," Charles observed, amused. "Outlaws are predictable," Colton muttered. "Marriage is uncharted territory." His friend clapped him on the shoulder. "Best kind of adventure, though. 20 years with Eliza, and I still find something new to love about her every day." At precisely noon, Colton took his place beneath the flower-covered arch in the town square. Nearly everyone in Silver Creek had turned out for the occasion, filling the hastily assembled benches and spilling over to stand along the edges of the square. When the fiddle music began, and the crowd rose to their feet, Colton's nervousness vanished. There was only Nora, walking toward him on the arm of Mr. Peterson, standing in for her father, radiant in a gown of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot atop her head, with a few curls framing her face, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered by her students. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices steady and sure, then added personal promises they had written separately. "I promise to be your shelter in every storm," Colton said, holding her hands in his. "To walk beside you rather than ahead or behind. To honor the strength and courage that brought you into my life, and to spend every day ensuring you never regret choosing me." Nora's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she responded, "I promise to be your partner in all things. To trust in the goodness I see in you, even when you doubt it yourself. To build a home and a life filled with joy and purpose. And to love you, Colton Drake, with every breath I take, for all the days we're granted together." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of the entire community. In that moment, he felt something he'd never expected to feel in this lifetime: complete and perfect happiness. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food, lively music, dancing, and enough whiskey to ensure the festivities continued well into the night. Colton and Nora moved through it all in a daze of joy, accepting congratulations, dancing, laughing, and occasionally stealing away for moments alone. "Happy, Mrs. Drake?" Colton asked during one such interlude as they stood in the shadow of the schoolhouse, momentarily escaping the revelry. "Deliriously," she confirmed, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I'm finding I'm rather impatient for the celebration to end and our marriage to begin." The husky note in her voice sent a jolt of desire through him. "That makes two of us." Their new house wasn't quite finished. The upstairs room still lacked proper walls, but the main floor was complete enough. They had decided to spend their wedding night there rather than at Nora's teacher's quarters, marking the beginning of their life together in what would be their home. When they finally made their escape from the celebration, riding in a wagon festooned with ribbons and followed by good-natured catcalls, the sun had long since set. The stars overhead seemed to Colton like a blessing on their union, a canopy of light guiding them home. The house stood dark and waiting, but Colton had prepared earlier in the day, leaving lamps ready to be lit and a fire laid in the hearth. He helped Nora down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Drake," he said, setting her gently on her feet in what would be their parlor. Nora turned slowly, taking in the room with its new furniture, a wedding gift from Charles and Eliza, and the windows that would, in daylight, frame their view of the mountains. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Everything I could have dreamed of." Colton lit the lamps and the fire, casting a warm glow throughout the space. When he turned back to his wife, she was standing by the hearth, the firelight gilding her profile, her hands working at the buttons of her wedding gown. "Let me," he said softly, crossing to her. With reverent care, he helped her undress, his fingers sometimes fumbling with the tiny buttons and hooks but never hurrying. Each new expanse of skin revealed was like a gift, to be treasured and adored. When she stood before him in only her thin chemise, her hair tumbling around her shoulders, Colton felt humbled by her trust, her beauty, her love. Their first night together as husband and wife was a discovery of each other, tender, passionate, occasionally awkward but always filled with love and wonder. Afterward, as Nora lay curled against him, her head on his chest and her hair spilling across the pillow, Colton marveled at the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking?" she murmured sleepily, sensing his wakefulness. "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming Territory," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "and that I never expected to find this kind of happiness." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her expression serious despite her drowsiness. "Promise me something, Colton." "Anything. Promise you'll remember this feeling, this exact moment, the next time you start believing you don't deserve happiness." He met her gaze, recognizing the insight behind her request. "I promise." Satisfied, she settled back against him, and soon her breathing deepened into sleep. Colton remained awake a while longer, holding his wife close, imprinting every detail of this night on his memory just as she had asked. The summer passed in a haze of happiness as they settled into married life. Their house was completed by early August, a handsome two-story structure that quickly became a home under Nora's careful attention. She continued teaching, riding to town each morning and returning each afternoon, while Colton's responsibilities at the ranch increased with his partnership stake. In the evenings, they would sit on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in ever-changing colors, talking about their days, their dreams, their future. Sometimes they entertained Charles, and Eliza were frequent visitors, as were various friends from town. Other times they were content in their solitude, building the private world that existed only between them. As autumn approached, bringing cooler nights and hints of gold and crimson to the aspen groves on the mountainsides, Nora began to suspect a change in their circumstances. She waited to be certain before sharing her suspicions with Colton. On a crisp September evening, as they sat before the fire after dinner, she finally spoke the words she'd been holding close for weeks. "Colton, I'm going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, processing her words. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing until it seemed to illuminate his entire being. "A baby," he repeated, the word sounding new and wonderful on his tongue. "When?" "April, I think. Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." She bit her lip nervously. "Are you happy about it?" In answer, Colton moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Nora. I don't even have words for what I'm feeling." He pressed his lips to her still flat stomach, then looked up at her with eyes that shone suspiciously bright. "A baby, our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. One of the upstairs bedrooms was transformed into a nursery, with a cradle handcrafted by Colton and curtains sewn by Nora. Friends and neighbors, upon learning their news, showered them with gifts and advice, some welcome, some less so. As Nora's body changed, growing round with their child, Colton found himself falling in love with her all over again. There was something magnificent about her now, a serene confidence, a deep contentment that made her even more beautiful in his eyes. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. The valley transformed into a white wonderland, pristine and peaceful. Inside their home, Colton and Nora created their own warmth, preparing for both the coming Christmas and the arrival of their child in the spring. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire after returning from the town celebration, Colton presented Nora with a special gift, a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "For our child," he explained as she ran her fingers over the soft cover. "I thought we could write to them from now until they're old enough to read it themselves. Our hopes, our dreams for them, stories about our lives before they came along." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, leaning over to kiss him softly. "We'll start tonight." That evening, they wrote their first entries side by side at the kitchen table. Nora penned a beautiful letter about her hopes for their child's future, while Colton, less eloquent but no less heartfelt, wrote about the day he learned he was to be a father and the overwhelming love he already felt for this unborn child. Winter deepened, and with it, Nora's pregnancy progressed. By February, she had reluctantly taken a leave of absence from teaching, finding the daily ride to and from town too taxing in her condition. A young woman from Billingston, qualified but not as experienced, took over her classes temporarily. "Just until after the baby comes," Nora insisted when Colton suggested she might want to consider a longer break. "I miss the children already." "And they miss you," he assured her, having heard as much from parents in town. "But right now, our child needs you more." March brought the first signs of spring, longer days, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, birds returning from their winter retreats. And with it came increasing discomfort for Nora as her due date approached. "Your son is restless," she complained good-naturedly one evening as they prepared for bed, her hands massaging her swollen belly. "Or daughter," Colton reminded her, placing his own hand beside hers to feel the strong kicks. "Either way, clearly impatient to join us." "Like father, like child," she teased, recalling his admitted impatience during their courtship. April arrived with a burst of new-growth crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, buds swelling on the trees, the creek running full and fast with meltwater. Nora's time was very near, and Colton found himself increasingly anxious, riding into town almost daily to ensure Dr. Harrison remained available and not called away to some distant homestead. "First babies often take their time," the doctor assured him. "But I'll be ready when yours decides to make an appearance." The doctor's words proved prophetic. Nora's labor began on April 12, a full week past her estimated due date. It started gradually mild discomfort in the early morning that intensified throughout the day. By evening, there was no doubt that their child was finally on its way. Colton rode hard for town, returning with Dr. Harrison just as Nora's contractions were coming regularly and forcefully. The next hours were among the longest and most difficult of Colton's life, pacing outside the bedroom where his wife labored, hearing her cries of pain and being unable to ease them, praying more fervently than he had since childhood. Just as dawn was breaking on April 13, 1880, A new cry joined Nora's, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn entering the world. "You have a son, Mr. Drake," Dr. Harrison announced, opening the bedroom door with a tired smile. "A fine, healthy boy. Your wife is asking for you." Colton entered the room on shaky legs to find Nora propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he approached, her smile tender and triumphant. "Meet your son," she said softly, turning the bundle slightly so Colton could see the tiny face within. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the rush of emotion that threatened to bring him to his knees. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair on his head and impossibly small features. To Colton, he was the most perfect thing he'd ever seen. "Would you like to hold him?" Nora asked. Colton nodded, unable to speak, and accepted the precious bundle with trembling hands. The baby squirmed slightly, then settled against his father's chest, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl reflexively around Colton's finger. "Hello, little one," Colton whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your pa." The moment was indelibly etched into his heart, the weight of his son in his arms, the trusting grip of those tiny fingers, the overwhelming sense of love and responsibility that washed over him. "What shall we call him?" Nora asked, watching them with tired eyes bright with happiness. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any definite choices. Now, looking down at his son's face, Colton knew. "William," he said. "After your father, William Charles Drake." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "It's perfect. We'll call him Will." "Will," Colton repeated, testing the name. "Welcome to the world, Will Drake." The days and weeks that followed were a blur of new experiences, midnight feedings, diaper changes, learning to interpret different cries, the wonder of watching tiny features gradually become more defined. Colton was as involved as any father could be, often rising in the night to bring the baby to Nora for feeding, then walking the floor with him afterward until he settled back to sleep. "You're a natural," Nora observed one afternoon, finding them on the front porch, while sleeping peacefully on Colton's chest while his father read reports from the ranch. "He makes it easy," Colton replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Will had a healthy set of lungs and definite opinions about when and how he should be held, fed, and comforted. As spring gave way to summer, their little family established new routines. Nora opted to extend her leave from teaching until the fall term, wanting these precious months with their son. Colton adjusted his work schedule to be home more, delegating tasks he once would have handled personally to the increasingly capable ranch hands. Will thrived under their devoted care, growing from a wrinkled newborn into a chubby, alert infant with his father's blue eyes and what promised to be his mother's smile. He became the center of their world, the focus of their days, and the subject of their evening conversations as they marveled over each new achievement, no matter how small. By Will's first birthday, life had settled into a new normal. Nora had returned to teaching, taking Will with her most days. A corner of the schoolroom had been converted into a play area where he could nap and play under her watchful eye. The arrangement worked well, allowing Nora to continue the work she loved while keeping her son close. Colton's partnership with Charles flourished, expanding the ranch's operations and prosperity. The percentage of his ownership had increased to 15%, with plans for further growth as the cattle market remained strong. Their home, once new, had become lived in and loved, filled with the accumulated treasures of family life. On a warm summer evening, as they celebrated their second wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after Will had been put to bed, Colton raised his wine glass in a toast. "To the woman who changed everything," he said, his eyes holding Nora's across the candlelit table. "When I saw you trembling on that auction platform, I had no idea I was looking at my future, my happiness, my home, my family." Nora touched her glass to his. "To the man brave enough to interrupt an auction and challenge a town full of men for a woman he didn't know. My hero, then and now." Later, as they stood on their porch watching the stars emerge one by one, Colton's arm around Nora's waist and her head resting against his shoulder, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter at an auction in Buffalo to a home and family in Silver Creek, it seemed both impossible and inevitable. The man he had been 3 years ago would never have imagined this life. Yet somehow, despite all the wrong turns and dark paths he had traveled, he had found his way here to this woman, this child, this home. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, sensing his introspection. "About how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't stopped in Buffalo that day, if I'd ridden on past that auction." She turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious in the gathering darkness. "But you did stop. That's what matters. All the choices that led us both to that moment, the good ones and the bad, they brought us together. They brought us here." As if to punctuate her words, a cry came from inside the house, Will awakening from his sleep, perhaps sensing his parents' absence. "I'll go," Colton said, pressing a kiss to Nora's forehead before heading inside to tend to their son. As he lifted Will from his crib, soothing him with gentle words and a steady hand on his back, Colton felt the familiar surge of love and gratitude that had become the foundation of his life. This child, this marriage, this home, they were his redemption, his future, his heart made visible in the world. Once, he had been a man defined by violence and solitude, by the ghosts of those he had hunted, and the emptiness of a life without roots or connection. Now, he was Colton Drake, husband, father, rancher, community member. A man with a past, but also, more importantly, a present filled with love and a future bright with promise. Will settled against his father's shoulder, his small body warm and trusting. Outside, Nora still stood on the porch, her silhouette outlined against the star-filled sky. His family, his world, from the auction platform in Buffalo to this moment, it had been a journey of transformation, not just for Nora but for Colton himself. A journey that had begun with one impulsive act of decency, and led to a life he could never have imagined, but now could not imagine living without. As he stood in the quiet nursery, his son breathing softly against his neck and his wife waiting just outside, Colton Drake knew with absolute certainty that he had found what every man seeks but few truly find, not just a place to belong, but people to belong to. A home not made of wood and stone, but of love and commitment and the daily choice to be better tomorrow than he had been yesterday. It was, he reflected as he carried Will out to join Nora beneath the vast Wyoming sky, everything he had never dared to hope for and more than he had ever dreamed possible. It was, simply and profoundly, enough.